Hey, welcome everybody to another episode here of the Shoreline Show. I have a good friend of mine here today, Matt Thomas, and we're just going to share some of his wisdom with us here today, aren't you, Matt?
I don't know about wisdom, but I'll share some funny stories maybe. Who knows?
Funny stories, yeah. Maybe we can
all get wise together.
That's awesome. So typically I like to start by kind of getting in your head about your childhood. What was your childhood like, and what did that look like?
Oh, that's a great question. So my childhood was very unique. Obviously I grew up in a little bit of underprivileged home. We lived 6 houses from Dickinson growing up. So I lived on 34 Dickinson, Southwest. You can go there and check it out. And,
right downtown Grand
Rapids. And, before that, we lived on Palace. And then my parents got divorced when I was 8. So then when they split, my dad remarried. My stepmom had a house on Dickinson. So we ended up moving there and lived there until I graduated and left from there. So it was something that for a long time, Rennie, I'll be honest with you, I was really afraid to share with people because I felt like it was something that would hold me back, right? So I was like, something that when people would ask me up until I was probably 30 years old, I didn't share a lot of that. And it was just one of those things I wanted to put it behind me. But then I realized it's part of who I am. It's part of what makes me unique, right? And so now I'm perfectly fine sharing where I grew up. And, there were some great moments that I learned along the way. And there were some moments where it was pretty scary, growing up in that neighborhood. But
it's funny because you told me a story about how you brought your kids over there.
Oh, yeah.
And because they see dad, this super professional guy that's doing his thing. And then they go and see and they're like, wait a minute, you grew up like this. It's funny, too, because Shelly and Steve, they used to challenge me and tell me to tell my story to people. Yeah. And when I first started real estate, and I'd turn bright red every single time. And it used to make me so mad because I'm like, I don't want to tell people where, my past, because that's my past and my future. I'm going forward. But then I think when you grow to a certain point in your life, you realize that is who you are. You learn from all the things, and then you almost get to this point where you have no regrets, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing I learned to realize too is my history doesn't define my future. And that took me a little bit because I always felt like it was something that was going to hold me back. If people ask me, it's like, and then I just realized that it's just part of who I am, and I'm okay with it. I'm comfortable with it. And frankly, if somebody said, hey, where you grew up makes me not want to be around you, it's like, that's fine. I'll find somebody else. I'm okay with it.
Exactly. That'd be a pretty sad reason for somebody to say they don't want to hang around with you. That's, I love that you shared that because I think so many times in business or even real estate agents that are trying to grow their business, and maybe they're selling houses, but they don't even own a house.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's great.
They don't even own a house right now. And now they got the real estate license and they're going to sell houses. And so that's like a defeating type of a
imposter
mindset, an imposter syndrome.
It is.
Yeah.
I felt like it was I was telling myself I wasn't good enough, because of that. And it was just one of those things. And it was just a stumbling block. And finally I just said, it's part of who I am. I'm okay with it. And I feel like the more I share, the more I shared it, the more free I became from that.
Right.
And was able to say, you know what? I'm an example of somebody that you can grow up in this neighborhood. You can grow up with these challenges. And my dad worked 2 jobs. He worked super hard for us to provide for us. So I have all the respect for him. But in my mind, I thought that was something that was going to hold me back. And in reality, when I look back, it actually helped define the leader inside of me. I didn't even know it until later on in life. And it was just, there were some things that just growing up and having to work hard to get, having to get a job super young just to be able to have a car and all these other things really helped define who I am today. And it was a great moment to take our 2 oldest children and spend an entire day just going back and seeing where I grew up, both houses and the schools I went to, and true story, how I had to take the city bus for a year to and from school because there wasn't even a bus route for our particular neighborhood. But it was cool because I got a free bus pass for the entire year. So I could go anywhere I wanted because I didn't have a car. So.
Yeah, so now I know your kids are in their young teens.
Actually, I have 2 older ones, so 20 and then 18, and then 14 and 12.
So maybe with 20 and 18, you can answer this. Like, how did you, and you said you took them back to see where you're at, but how did that translate for them now that they're getting into, I don't know, they're probably in college right now.
They're in college. Yeah,
they're in college. Yeah. How does that mindset for them now moving forward? Because it sounds like they grew up a little more privileged than you did.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. I think for them, it's to let them understand, like, hey, you've got to work in life. You've got to go after. You've got to chase whatever your dream is. I'm okay. We're going to back you. We did everything we could to set you up on a different level than what I had to fight for and go after. But at the end of the day, you still have to go. You have to do it yourself. You have to go out there and you have to own it and want it. And whatever it is, our thing is we want them to chase their dreams. We want them to chase their passions and what they're good at. And, if it's going to college, great. We're going to support them everything we can. If it's going to start a career right away, we're there for them, and we want to help set them up for success.
Yeah.
So it's, and I feel like my parents did a really good job of doing that. It was just there were limited, capacities.
Limited resources.
Yeah, that's okay.
The thing is, your pain is what gets you the gain, right? You know that from being in the military, right? You're an old school military dog, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things where I think your pain is what you get your gain, and I think a lot of parents these days don't want their kids to go through pain. And I'm willing to bet that you're okay with that a little bit on some level, letting your kids feel that. Because of your past. About
4 years ago, I started this phrase in our household that my wife and I, wanted to teach our children to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we specifically were able to put them in certain situations where it was like, ooh, they're uncomfortable. And we like that because what that does is that teaches them that they need to have flexibility in life. They need to be willing to say, oh, this is going to arise. How am I going to react? And not everything's mom or dad are not going to step in. And we started doing that at a younger age to help them so that they could realize that's an important skill set that they can learn and adapt. And so that's just one of the ways where it's like, okay, learn. This is something you're going to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Awesome. So growing up the way you did, what was like your biggest, you kind of grew up where, I'm guessing, did your parents have entrepreneurial spirit or no? Because you got
my dad worked at a factory.
Somewhere.
My dad worked at a factory for a long time, worked at the same company for a very, very long time. They were very good to him. But, there were times him and I would have a conversation like, Dad, you have the skill set to do something more. So inside of me, at a young age, I realized like, oh man, I don't just settle, right? And
that's good.
That doesn't mean that you find a job but for me, I felt like my dad had better skills than what he was getting compensated for, and yet he was very loyal to his organization. So there's always that balance there. So I learned loyalty from my dad tremendously. But I also learned like, hey, like if you're getting an hourly wage, you're going to be maxed based on how many hours you work or whatever. And so I knew right away that I wanted to do something that I felt like I could have a better earning potential and really control more of that myself with hard work, with relationship building, whatever it is. And so I knew that I wasn't going to just be an hourly worker at that point.
Right.
And then it was just a matter of figuring out what I enjoyed doing and what I was passionate about and had fun doing every day. And then lo and behold, I got into the automobile business, and it's hard to believe it's 26 years ago that I got into the business, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and that's why I've stuck with it, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great profession, great career. I've gotten to do amazing things and meet amazing people.
Yeah, definitely. I hear some of the stories that you have, some of the people that you have been able to meet, and I think what it comes down to is I hear from you is like you had this time where you started to do also some like coaching things, right? And people will always do that. Any entrepreneur is looking for talent. And they're going to try to capture that talent however they can in their under their umbrella. And I think that's where and I think you know this more than anybody, and I'd love to hit on this, is you pouring into your personal value and bringing that to the table every single day in what you do. And then you know that you can do it anywhere, but then they seen the value in you where they kept you. They were like, no, I see what you do, and they're willing to. So I think that's what people do is they go to their employer, want something. They always want something from them, right? Like I want, but at the end of the day, you're like, you don't have to give me anything, but I'm going to be what I am. And then ultimately they see the value and they really poured into you. Am I making sense?
Yeah,
Am I
well,
being
here
clear?
I'm gonna share the way I think about it, right? So most people are always going to their employee or whatever and saying, "Hey, what can you do for me?" My whole philosophy even before I got into the automobile business was, how can I add value? So that's just a living statement for me. So one of my passions is I want to add value to anybody, anywhere, every day. And at the end of the day, that's a reflection on me. So it's like at the end of the day, I'm going to sit down and rest my head on that pillow. And one of the questions that's going to go through my head every day, I promise you this, is who did I add value today? Who? Because I'm going to encounter anybody. It might be at Ziegler. It might be at the grocery store. It might be at men's. It might be anywhere. It might be my children. Where am I going to add value? And if I keep that mindset, guess what? I'm going to be valuable no matter where I go. And that's the thing. And so it's like when you work for an organization or whatever you're doing, it's like if you just have that simple mindset, add value. People are going to respect you. They're going to want you to be a part of their team because they know that you're coming. And listen, it's not about me. It's about the group. It's about you. It's about whoever I'm with at that moment. Because I know by adding value to them, I'm going to add value to myself as well. So that's just one of my core things that I learned a long time ago. And I actually I didn't come up with it. I got it from John Maxwell, because hearing him speak, that's one of his passions as well. And I'm like, I love it so much. I don't care. I'll copy it.
Well, that's one of the things I appreciate about you so much is you're always like reading and learning and constantly growing your maximum value. And that's why you bring maximum value everywhere you go, because you want to be that person that brings maximum value. So you're always pouring into yourself. So I think that's pretty awesome. So when was your biggest pivot for like your entrepreneurship? In your mind?
It's a great question. I don't think there was one. I think there's been multiple. I mean, there's been a ton of different ones. I think the one that I stepped out on the most of faith on was when I took over the first dealership, because I had to move to do that. So I worked for a great organization here in town. They treated me well. I had a great team of people, and I got recruited by another big organization that was outside the state. And so for me, I sat down with Kelly and it was like, hey, this is an opportunity. I might not get this opportunity again. And so we met together with them, and they offered us a job to take over a store that they were buying. And I did it. It was crazy. I did it. And so it was 20 years ago that moment took place. And I kid you not, it was like I'm moving my family. I'm taking over a new store. I don't even know anybody. And my neck was on the line because it was sink or swim. Because the day before, they told me they let all the managers go except the service manager and the parts manager. So everybody on the sales side was let go. And it was just like, hey, you're going to prove now you know how to do every single role on the front side. And so I worked 6 days a week. I worked a ton of hours. And just slowly but surely, and we crushed it. We absolutely had a blast. But and then I just started hiring a manager at a time, and took my time doing it. And then slow and be sure 6 months later, they bought a bigger store, and they said, "Hey, you can take this one." And so I did, and I worked for them for a couple of years, and then I ended up moving back and taking over the store I left. So the company I worked for recruited me back, and so it was great. But that was a huge leap. That was a pivot moment, because for me that was like, my neck is, I'm actually going to have to prove everything I said in those interviews that it's going to happen.
Talk cheap.
And we did, you know, and it wasn't because of me. It was because the team bought into the idea and the strategy and the vision of, we're going to be very, very aggressive right off the get-go. And I'm going to train everybody. We're going to work through it. And we did. And great people. I actually still am in contact with a couple of them to this day. Nice. And they're in a different state. But I just cherish those relationships, you know, so.
Yeah, and it all centered from bringing that maximum value, right? Like in who you are and everywhere you go as an individual, which is pretty cool.
The other time I think there was a big pivot for me too was, you know, for the first couple of years I was in the automobile business, it doesn't have a good stigma, right? Well, it didn't. And part of the reason is because people don't see that you can do it the right way and be very successful. So for me, it was like, you know, after a couple of years of being in there, I was a little annoyed where people are like, oh, you're in the car business. Like, again, it was kind of like where I grew up, right? It's that same thing. I'm in the car business. People are like, oh. And I'm like, I'm telling you, you can do it right, and you can be very successful. You can take care of customers. And so I had to make a mental decision at a point there where it was like, hey, either I'm going to stick in this, and this is going to be a career for me, or I'm going to leave this. And I just said, you know, I'm having too much fun. I'm going to make this a career. You know, I'm earning a great living. I get to meet new people every day, And I made that commitment that I'm going to make a career out of it. And that was another pivotal moment for me, you know, to just say, I'm in. It's like you say, burn the ships. I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do anything else for right now. I'm going to go after this. I'm going to chase this.
Yeah.
That was a big moment for me.
Yeah. How do you develop yourself as a leader?
All the time.
Yeah.
Conversations like this develop. You know,
Yeah.
I'm like Randy said, I'm huge on books, podcasts. I was listening to podcasts on the way here. I'm huge on that. You know, the book that transformed my life, obviously, aside from the Bible is the number one book. But aside from that,
That's good.
My first book that somebody gave me was when I moved to Indiana. So I was not an avid reader before then. And there was a gentleman that we sold a car to, and he was so blown away by how I was able. It was funny because I helped close the deal with him. And then, you know, 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh, and I'm the finance manager too, so we're going to do all your paperwork. He said,
oh, by the way, I'm going to do this.
Story. This was a small story. He said, hey, I got to meet the general manager. I said, no problem. I'm going to introduce him to you, because we were having such a great time. So he walks away. And then I come back out a couple minutes later and say, hey, by the way, I'm the general manager too. And we had a hoot. And I kid you not, he came back the next day and he gave me his book, Roadmap to Success Workbook.
What was that?
Roadmap to Success.
Okay,
it's a John Maxwell book.
Okay. Yep.
He gave it to me. He said, you should read this book. It'll change your life. And it took me 3 months to read that book.
Really?
But I digested it. I wrote all the notes and I took all the time. And I was in after that, and all I do now is read books all the time, and it's just like one after another. And when I can't read a book, I'll listen to one on Hoopla, or I'll listen to a podcast. And so that's one way. The other way is just meeting with people, mentors, you know. Randy and I, that's like we meet, and now all of a sudden it's that Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron. It's like we're learning from each other,
right?
And so those are things. I go to tons of conferences that I can, and just anything. I really believe that there's an accelerator. When you read a book, they say that it takes the average person 2 years to write a book. So when I read a book, I gain 2 years of somebody else's experience in my
powerful.
life. Right?
That's a great way to
so
look
think
at
about
it.
If it took you 1 month to read a book, 1 month, if it took you that long to read a book, but you read 12 books a year, you gain 24 years of experience from other people. So you can't get a better ROI anywhere else by doing that. So you think about it, right? 12 books a year, you gain 24 years worth of knowledge and experience. And so I've been able to share that anywhere. And I've challenged many people that say, I'm not a reader. I'm like, I hated reading. And now I love it, you know? And so I absorb everything I can. Somebody says, is it good? I just add it to my book list. And I either try to listen to it or read it, you know, pretty quick.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what's your favorite book of all time?
I don't have one favorite book. I would say, well, Developing the Leader Within You is an unbelievable, it's a timeless book, right?
Yeah.
So when people ask me a book to start with, I actually tell them to start with that book. One of my other favorite books of John Maxwell's is How Successful People Think. It's an older series. It's something that he wrote when he was in the 60s. They're actually this culmination of books, like there's 6 of them in the volumes. Super small book, really, really small. It's so packed. What I found on that book is it's like the best thoughts of all of his other books, right? So because he wrote them later in his life. So if you want a book that'll absolutely change the way you think, you read this book, and it's like, I mean, you'll highlight the whole thing. If I brought that out today, you would see
that one called?
How Successful People Think. It's blue and white book. I promise you, if I pulled it out right now, it like 80% of the book's highlighted. It's so good. It's so packed with stuff. That's a great book as well. And I do like, one of the other books I like is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's a really good book as well. Just helps you manage your time and who you're spending your time with. It's a really good book.
What I found is, for me, is what has been really a blessing is we started this book club with my team, and just doing it together too has been such a powerful thing for us. And I think if I could encourage anybody to do that, it would be to start something with your team. And because what happens is you guys kind of are going through the same molding experiences together, kind of like you mentioned, like the iron sharpens iron thing, right? Like you're kind of doing it together, which has been a kind of a cool experience for us as well. We did that at the last dealership I ran before I got into the position I'm at. So after I started there, same thing, like we have a weekly sales meeting, and I said, so the first book we did together was 15 Laws of Growth.
So I read every chapter, and then I would give them highlights of it, right? So I set them up a little bit. So if you're listening, sorry guys, they know that. But the reality was, then the next book, bought them all the book, and we divided up all the chapters. And everybody had to read a chapter and lead on that. So
that's
every
good.
week, and they do it to this day. So when we just started it, and it was just like from there, we never stopped. So every week, everybody's reading that chapter. And a different person on the team, no matter who it is, a different person goes in the rotation and leads the conversation of that chapter that week. So
that's good.
And I remember one of the salespeople saying, "I'm going to quit because of this." And I said, "You just got to trust me. You got to give me 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months, I promise you, this is going to change your life."
Yeah.
And he still works there today. And I'm telling you, it's absolutely transformed him, because he's like, I think I have so much more skill sets and things that I never, and it's helped his home life more than his professional life. So it's really, really powerful.
I think we find that in our business as well, is that, you know, you got to work on the whole person.
That's right.
You know, so many times I think you hire an agent or you hire a salesperson, it's like, oh, go out there and sell. But if their whole person is not good, if they're fighting with their wife, or their health isn't good, or whatever, they're not going to be able to go out and sell cars. Even if somebody just drops in their lap, they'll probably screw something up because the rest of their life is not going good. So I think that's so important to do that.
Yeah, I think mental health is a big deal for people. I think at the core of every single person is everybody's good people. They have so much potential in their own realm and what they can do. And if everybody lived to their fullest potential, I couldn't imagine where the world would be today, right? Like, it would be such an amazing place. But I think the issue is there's all this garbage in their life, and some of it's food garbage. I mean, I always joke with these young kids, especially because I just got back from a youth camp. It's like, if you were to take a plant and put everything in a blender that you ate, and you were to pour it in that plant, a lot of stuff that people are eating, that plant would die. If it's chicken nuggets, Mountain Dew, and Coca-Cola, and you put that into a plant, that plant's going to die. But it's the same thing with mental. If you're all of a sudden, they did this study, I think it was Mythbusters. You ever see that? It's pretty good. They did this thing where they played like this crazy music in a greenhouse for these plants, but then they turn around and they play like classical music and those plants that actually were in the greenhouse with like the classical music flourished more than the ones that they were like the crazy, like down, you know, like not good music, right? When it came to death, destruction, whatever it may be. So I believe you are with what you put in. You're the average of like the people you're around and all these things. So you do have to work on 100%.
What are you eating? What are you... What
it's that old circle wheel, right? It's the circle wheel, and just looking at but most people don't do that. You know, they'll just look at their career, or they'll look, and it's like, no, everything, there's that holistic approach. Balance is very important for any person, especially leaders. You have to have balance in your life. And we're all going to get out of balance, right? I mean, we're all going to look like the egg. Yeah. But you can't look like the egg for 6 months. You figure out how that you're out of balance, you kind of bring it back in, and then something else will probably get out of balance. I mean, that's just how there's a lot of things coming at us each and every day, but you got to be able to recognize it. The problem is a lot of people can't even recognize it because they never look at the holistic approach, so they don't see they're out of balance, you know. And you could be out of balance where it's like all of a sudden you're working out way too much, right? And that's all of a sudden a driver, but then you're letting something else go in your life, and so you have to look at that. And balance is important.
Yeah, I think as entrepreneurs we have a tendency where ours could be we work a lot more than we probably sometimes should. Taking a step back and saying, okay, what's my priorities? And that's, you know, your family and going back to the core and your faith and these things that are the most important. And I think that we have a tendency the world has a tendency to pull you into directions that you probably shouldn't be in, you know, and you got that's why it's important to know where you want to be and how you want to be it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what projects are you working on now?
Well, we just closed on 4 new dealerships. So we closed on that last week. And
that's a beast of a job.
We just closed on 4.
So we closed on 4. Awesome. We've got an unbelievable team. So it's not like one person does it. We have a team of people that we divide everything out, and we start that process as soon as we know that we can make it formal to people, and everybody divides and conquers. And then we have weekly, depending on what is sold, the stuff that I oversee, I have a weekly cadence call with either those organizations or those partners of ours, and then we're just setting everything up behind the scenes. There's some things, unfortunately, that where I handle, you can't really make it go live till the buy sell is complete.
Right.
So it's like, well, here's that document, and then let's see if it all works.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but when you do everything behind the scenes, it's pretty
So
good.
is this your brand new dealerships, or these are existing ones that you're
Existing
buying?
ones that we
and-
bought. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, that we
nice.
added to it. So now we have 39
Okay.
dealerships in our group, and so they were existing. So that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just a matter of those team members
Mm-hmm.
doing everything we can to onboard them ahead of time, so that when that day comes, we can hit the ground running. And then put our processes in, our
Mm-hmm.
structure, the things that we do differently that we have found are really successful for us. And at the same point, walking in there with an open mindset to say, what are you doing that is unbelievable that we want to continue to do, right?
Right.
Or that we're not
Yeah.
even doing that we should start doing. So it's
Right.
like a great learning opportunity for us.
Right.
That's how we've learned all these things along the way. Oh, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
It could be from the smallest thing of how you stock a car in, to
Yeah.
a big structure of,
Yeah.
advertising, a source that maybe we weren't aware of that's
Mm-hmm.
really doing very well for them. So it's like all these things in between. So that was really busy, and so I'm still working with that. I'll work with that through the rest of this week, and then it's
Nice.
a matter of to the next thing,
Yeah.
Do you find what's cool is one of the things that we're going through this book right now, it's called Extreme Ownership. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And one of they talk about is, there's really no bad teams, there's bad leaders. And do you ever find any like dealerships that you take over that are in destruction, and then you guys come in with your team and you can get it flourishing? I bet you see that firsthand, I would assume, because I would think that's your target market. You find these things that are struggling, they might not be so hot, and you come in and say, well, no, because they are all great. There's greatness there. It just needs to be a little bit restructured, which is kind of cool. I'm sure that develops you as well, but do you see that a lot?
I see a little bit of everything with that. I see that sometimes it is the leader, right? You walk in there and it's like, this leader has zero vision. This leader's totally disengaged. This leader's could be a taskmaster, right? Where this leader's just grinding everybody,
Right.
And so you got to assess that. But then you also have to assess the team, because sometimes it is the team. Sometimes the team is stagnant. Sometimes the team is, there's no structure in place for the team, right? And that's not always the leader's fault. It could be you have a great leader you have a couple of rogue people inside that are on the team. They're like, I'm not going to do that.
Disrupting things.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's like you got inner turmoil there, right? So I mean, in being in this business, taking over 7 dealerships in my career, so 7 stores I've taken over.
Yeah.
I've seen a little bit of everything. And I've been the leader too, where it's like I'm the person holding things back, right?
Yeah.
I've been that leader where it's like, that guy's got to go, right? Where it's like,
Right,
That's cool that you recognize that.
I was
That's
a
huge.
micromanager for a while in my career as a leader.
Right.
So I've seen it all. I've been a little bit of every part of that, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, so it's like, I think that's where you get in, you kind of assess, you try to assess what you can ahead of time to figure out, what do we have here? How can we come alongside to help? And then you just make some changes. But our goal is never to just walk in day one and start making a bunch of changes that are personnel-wise. We want to go
Right.
in, figure out what we've got, and then figure out over the next 90 days, what do we really need to adjust here? Because it could be a training thing. It could be
Yeah.
just lack of training, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The store I took over, the first store, it was lack of training. I walk in there and it was clear. What's your sales process? Nobody can answer the question.
Right.
That's a lack of training, right?
Yeah.
So it was just like, okay, I'm going to keep all of you. We're going to start from the fundamentals and we're going to do it just like this. And then we'll see where we're at, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all these people are flourishing because they just never been trained. They didn't even know what they're doing. So
Right.
it could be a myriad of things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
they talk about that when I think it was this Navy SEALs team. They were going into Ramadi, and they kind of were talking about they didn't understand why anybody would go into this area, and because there was no purpose in it. But the executive leadership team did have a purpose for it. But when it was clear and they learned, they were able to make less mistakes when the vision was sold exactly what they were doing in the agendas. But sometimes you have to trust in your leadership, even though you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's the hard part as a good leader is like having that trust where if you make a decision, people have to trust. Because there was a time, even in Shelley and I, if we're being real, that I didn't trust the decisions that she made.
Right.
And now I allow her, like, like, nah, I shouldn't say allow, but
Yeah.
it's true. Like in my
Right.
mind, I don't question things she does. Like she'll do
Right.
things I'm like, I don't know about that, but run with it because I just know who she is as a person and the leader that she is, and that and the vision that she has. So I think that comes with time and the energy that you put into your people, where you're like, okay, I might not understand everything she does, but I'm gonna roll with it because she's like, I trust her, right? Like and I think that's the biggest thing you're trying to get with your team, is where you might be making some decisions that they're like, whoa, this seems crazy, but we have a plan. Let me execute the plan.
That's right.
I always joke, and I said it on a previous episode, is like, it always reminds me of like an artist, right? And as an artist, I think one of the biggest mistakes you can make is take the artist's hand and start moving it yourself. It's like they see this picture and they're drawing it out, but you're like, well, you probably should do this, and they're like, oh, and then you're like, oh, and this other person says I should do this. Next thing you know, this canvas looks like crap because nobody knows what's happening. But sometimes you got to let the artist do what they're gonna do, and then because they see the end goal. So that's kind of what I choose to think of as like sometimes, and that's where I God put it on my heart, is just to let people do what they're gonna do as long as you trust in them, unless they somehow ruin that, which I think you see leaders, you're like, yeah, I can't trust anything they're doing because of maybe ethical things or whatever it may be. But that's where you come back to your team, and I come back to you sometimes. I'll be like, dude, am I crazy here? You have to have your people too, right? And you're like, right? Like, think about it this way or that way, right?
That's exactly it. And and again, when when you think of 5 dysfunctional team, the first level is trust, right? So you have to trust. And a lot of people believe you got to earn trust. I'm of the opposite belief. Like the day I walk into a dealership, I give everybody 100% trust, and then I tell them I empower you to keep it at that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
That's
just
true.
like you need to give me 100% trust, and it's up to me to keep it that way, right? And when I don't do something that I said, then I just lose somebody's trust, right? So it's like that. What that does then is that says the bar is here. Let's try to keep it here.
Let's keep it
Not
there.
you're gonna start here and you've got to earn it.
Right.
That's good.
That's demoralizing to people. I would much rather say, here's where we're at, and let's keep it here.
Yeah.
And let's work really, really hard to keep it at this level.
Yeah.
That's
And so I
powerful.
think that's important,
Yeah.
And again, that's not how it was at the beginning. I had to learn that, right? Because it
Right.
was like, no, give it away. Give the trust away, and then people will keep it. They're going to do everything they can.
Yeah.
And then when there's a point where it gets lowered, you just have the conversation around it.
Right.
And it's like, okay,
Right.
here's how I felt. It's a misunderstanding, or maybe they did let me down. It doesn't matter. Talk it through, figure it out.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So not just necessarily business, but business as well. Where do you see your future? What do you want to do? Any big plans? Anything in your future? Do you think you're going to be in the car industry forever? Or do you think it's going to be?
That's a great question. I love what I do because it's different every day.
Right.
Which is important to me because, I'm just at a different point in my career. I feel like that's what allows me to help add value to people every day, right? So I get to do a lot of different things. NASCAR, I get to do foundations, I get to do acquisition, a little bit of everything, and I get to teach too. So, there's a lot of things that I enjoy in that. So I could do that for a while. I'm always open to whatever I feel God wants me to do, right?
That's
so
powerful.
the reality is I have to be open to that because it's not always necessarily, if God's got a better plan for me, then I have to be open to that. And that's important. That's more important than anything else. And so who knows what the Lord will bring up.
And I think your employer, Ziegler, I think they appreciate that about you.
Yeah.
I think that's why they can pull you and stretch you and say, okay, I can put you in these places and you're going to adapt and you're going to figure it out. You're not so stuck. You're going to be like, again, it comes down to the gifts that you're in. There's times that you might be better fit somewhere else or whatever it may be, which is awesome.
Yeah, one thing I'm comfortable with now too as well is just being able to say, that's not the best thing for me, right? And not that I don't want it. It's like if I know somebody else on our team is better suited to do something, I'm okay with saying that person's actually better to do that than me, right?
That's
not that I
amazing.
don't
That's
want
good.
it. It's the reality is it's their time to shine, and their skill set mirrors up. Just like there's things where we know that I'm really good at this particular thing. It's like people will come to me on that,
Right.
and so I've had to get comfortable because the old me would be like a long time. It was like, I just gotta I have to take that on because it's going to help me look better. And it's like, okay, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
If anything, what happens is too much makes me look really bad because I don't get it all accomplished or I'm not as good as that person. And so, that's part of growing as a leader. You have to be comfortable with knowing what things you're really good at and what things you should probably have somebody else on your team do.
Right.
No, that's powerful. So if you were to share one piece of advice from somebody that is looking to just start their own journey in entrepreneur spirit, let's say it's a young 20-year-old, 18, 20-year-old that's just starting to blaze a trail, or kind of like when you were 18, 20, what's that one piece of advice you would want to tell somebody? Like,
yeah, I actually thought about that, because that one there was like, I would say, I wrote a couple things down. Number one, I think you got to begin with yourself. You got to have a way of developing yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're not developing yourself, as an entrepreneur, you have to set aside time to develop yourself, whatever that might be. So maybe you might not know how to write a business plan or whatever. Okay, well, read a book on it, right? Mm-hmm. You might not understand how to do checks and balances or whatever. You need to pursue that. It doesn't need to be your gift. The reality is, if it's something you need to learn, buy a book, go read a course, do a course, do whatever it takes, because you got to develop yourself. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I think you got to surround yourself with really key people. So too many times, people try to Lone Ranger it. You can't do it. I don't care who you are. It's just not possible today. So you got to find some people in your life that can walk the journey with you and that really care about you, whether it's your friends. And sometimes your friends aren't those people. Sometimes it's other people that, you'll figure out that person's really good. So I find that if somebody's good at something, I want to seek them out and figure out what it is that makes them good at that.
Right.
And how do I add that to my toolbox? So it's like, find people. You should always have a mentor. One of the things I've always done is had mentors in my life. So I've always had somebody that's 10 years older than me, 20 years older. And at one point I had somebody that was, back in the day, 30 years older. Now they're probably dead. No, just kidding.
That's hilarious.
But then I also mentor people.
Yes.
So it's like, now it's like you're getting stretched both ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what that does is it's like, it helps you get to experience, to be able to bounce stuff off from people that are saying, I've done that, I've been there. Or sometimes you're just getting that countless wisdom. And then the other side is challenging you to say, who are you pouring into? So it's like, I love that fact. So even as an entrepreneur, do both, right? Mm-hmm. Have a mentor and be a mentor on both sides of that, And then the other part I wrote down was learn to listen, because I wish I would have done that a lot more at a younger age with people that were around me, and just not. When I sat with a mentor, I always had 5 questions, and I would listen. I would ask the question and listen. The problem was, as a leader, I didn't always listen to the people that were around me, because a lot of people were coming to me for the decisions. Mm-hmm. It took me a long time in my career to flip that whole model and to say, no, what do you think? Oh, you decide. What would you think would be best in this one? How would you handle it? That whole model shift was huge for my leadership and the people that were around me.
Right.
To say, now they're making the decisions. Mm-hmm. I don't need to make the decisions. If I'm not here, it's okay. It's going to run perfectly fine. And that learning to listen is a tough one, even as an entrepreneur, because you feel like you have to have all the answers. No, ask the people around you and just listen. They'll tell you.
I think that's really good. Yeah, because I think that, I would say I'm kind of starting to put myself in that position now, where it's like you have to say, okay, what's your thoughts, and empower other people to kind of pour into your life, because, but you want to make sure they're the right people too. Yeah. Because I'm very careful on who I let pour into my life. Like, we have these conversations actually earlier, Shelly and I did, about who pours into your life, because it can be a bad thing as well. And if you let the wrong people pour into your life, you'll go into directions that you don't want to be in, right? So it kind of goes back to that. You're the average of the 5 people. We all heard it before, that you're around, and that could be spiritually, mentally, physically, relationally, anything. And you'll see typically people that, like divorce, people that are divorced, or people that have been through things, are divorced, or that are big drinkers or anything. They hang out in the same crew. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty obvious. That's not some wise wisdom. Just watch and say, okay, I can see where that group is heading, and I want nothing to do with it. One of the biggest things that I'm a firm believer in, you mentioned, is the group. For me, it was military school. Like, the people I was around is leaving and going to an environment. And that's why if I can tell anybody on this podcast, if you don't like where you're at, in high school it's tough when you're young, because you're stuck in the environment you're in. And life is really hard, I think, for those kids, because they're in the environments they're in, and they cannot get out of them, because it might be, let's be honest, your mom, your dad, your brother, sister, you cannot get out of that environment. Right. But the real world is so many people. There's such an abundance that you're going to be able to pick and choose the people that you're around. Give it time. and you can design your group of people. The world's huge. And I think that's one of the things, like, if you can even convince your parents in a young age. It's like, I was recently talking to this kid at camp. He was from Pakistan. A good friend of mine. Got to develop a relationship with him, but he went off to a boarding school. And I was like, I think that developed a lot. Like, you've heard him multiple times throughout the camp talking about the influence that had on him. I'm like, it's kind of good, to be in those positions where you leave and you're developed, right? And I don't think that we have that in today's society. Yeah. It's almost this mentorship. It's I'm live with you because you're my dad, you're my mom, instead of this mentorship guidance. And I don't think a lot of kids have that. So if I can drive anything home on this podcast, it's watch the environment you're with, and if you don't have control over it, give it time, because it will change, right? Yeah. And you'll be able to choose it.
Yeah, you're right. You can do a lot of things with that, and you don't, just because you're in the environment doesn't mean you need to become part of it.
Right.
That's good.
Right? Which so many of us, that's happened to us, every one of us. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you don't. There are things that you can control inside that environment still. You can control your attitude. I can control my attitude, right?
Yeah.
That's Nobody good. Else in that environment has the control over my attitude. I do, right? So we know that. And so there's certain things that we can control no matter what environment we're in. We have to take ownership of that.
Absolutely.
Right? And so that's important.
That's powerful, for sure.
Good stuff. Well, one of the things that we do here on the Shoreline Show is we have a message in a bottle.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Rennie probably told you a little bit about that, but our last guest wrote a message and put it in there for you. And so what we need you to do is take the message out, read it, and you'll be able to respond to that message.
All right, let's see here. Do I need to read out loud?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Okay, it says, Matt, you are the winner of $1 million by the Shoreline Show. Congratulations. No, it doesn't say that. I'm just kidding. Yeah. I'm just teasing.
Cut that. Just kidding.
No, it says, I was a bit nervous doing the show because I know that one day my great-great-great-grandkids will be able to see me. What would you want your future grandkids to know about you a couple of generations from now? Oh, so what I would want my grandchildren to know about me is that God changed my life. Literally all this that I'm experiencing today is because God changed my life. I grew up in a church, but ultimately when I was like 17, 18 years old, I was pretty rebellious and decided that I didn't want any part of it at all, and took this 6 to 9 month journey on my life. And it was probably the most depressed I ever was, by far. And so when I ran into one of my friends, and he's just like, man, I'd love to see you back. And then I was drinking really, really bad at the time too, and it totally changed my life. I stopped drinking cold turkey. I recommitted my life to Christ, and the journey has been unbelievable ever since then.
That's awesome.
So it's been something that my kids, I'm very straightforward with them on it. I've told them the entire story. We laugh about it. I don't hold anything back on that. And then it's something I would tell my grandkids as well, to say, look, this was how my life was. You don't have to do that. You can take my experience and run with it, or you can try it for yourself. But I promise you, you can take my words for it. And it's just changed. It's just one door opened after another. And I wouldn't be where I am today without, my life being recommitted to the Lord, period.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
So that's the legacy. The word legacy is really important to me, and that's the legacy that I want to leave for many, many generations to come, is that, I love the Lord, and I want all my kids and the grandkids and great-great-grandkids to love the Lord as well. So
that's awesome.
It's made a big difference, and that's the generational shift. So
awesome.
No, I think that's a big deal. Is, I receive what you're saying on the whole. I think people that go after things in their life and they're searching, and I see people all the time, especially when it comes to drinking, or they smoke weed or anything. And I'm not, if that's what you do, it doesn't come from a judgment standpoint at any level for me. And it doesn't sound like, it's more just like, they chase it because they feel like it makes them feel good. But it's just filling an empty. It's like a funnel. It just goes through and it never stops. You never feel filled by the thing that you're doing. So that's why there's never enough alcohol. That's why the alcoholism exists, because there's never enough alcohol.
Never.
I do a little bit today, and it's like a good time. And I actually will notice we at one point in time, Aaron and I had a friend group that they were probably the funnest, most loving group we've ever been a part of. To be honest with you, they're amazing. But then they would drink. Right, and then and that's not a problem. Again, not an issue. But then what happens is, then next thing you know, they're drinking not only on Saturdays. Now they're drinking Fridays and Saturdays. And then it became Wednesdays. Then it became it became drop the kids off at church, and then we'll go have a few drinks. And then it became what I noticed, where even when you would hang out with them, they couldn't be enjoyable unless they were drinking. And then it got to a point where they couldn't be enjoyable unless they were drinking and they were wasted. And then you're like, okay, this is really interesting, right? It's never ending. And then eventually it becomes, you add more things and more things. So it is, it's one of those things where people are always trying to fill this funnel full of stuff and garbage, but you'll never fill it. And there's only one really way to fill it, but, people have to figure that out, right? And that's Jesus himself, right? And that's what I believe. And that's not what this is centered around, this show, but it's with all my heart, it's true, right? And I think that's what people are looking for these other things from. And yeah, it's cool to hear you say that, for sure.
Yeah, it was just a void that I was trying to fill no matter what, right? Whether it's I've tried to fill it with other things, even as I live my life for Christ. I mean, I tried success too, right? The reality is, you try money, you try success, you try all these things, and you still realize, like, you're just trying to fill that void or whatever, and it's just, it's never lasting. And but it changed my life. It really did, and it's just
that's awesome.
It's been an amazing ride, So I'm very blessed and very thankful.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for watching us on the Shoreline Show. You can find us obviously on YouTube. You'll also be able to find us, the audio version, on all the platforms that do audio podcasts as well. So like us, share us, drop us a note. That would be awesome.
Yeah, we'd love that.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
One other question.
Yes.
If people want to find you, how would they get a hold of you? If you impact and somebody's like, I really want to get a hold of him because it hit home. Is there a way people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, you can look me up on social media. So my Instagram is matt.john.thomas. So you can, message me through that. And I'm on Facebook as well. I don't check them all the time. I'll be honest with you. I do help with that with Ziegler, but I'm not on all the time because it's just not a huge priority to me.
Yeah.
And but those are the ways you could at least start messaging me or whenever, send me a private message, and I'll get back to you.
Absolutely, I love it. Appreciate it.
Awesome.